Welcome to the Birds and the Bees podcast. This is Braxton Dutson.
That's the key. People aren't talking about it.
Everybody needs to know that porn is not a documentary.
It's not like if we don't talk to kids about sex and sexuality, they're not going to hear about it. They're just not going to hear about it from us.
They have tons of questions, they just don't know how to ask them.
All you have to do is be one chapter ahead. You don't have to know everything. Just one chapter ahead of wherever your child is.
Welcome to Birds and the Bees podcast, episode 17. Now today I sat down with one of my favorite other podcasters and other therapists. Her name is Jessie Shepard, otherwise known as Jessie the Therapist, because that's her website, and that's the way that she has been played in my brain. I always think of her as Jessie the Therapist. But she's joining us today to talk about eating disorders. And she specifically works with teens and adults who are experiencing eating disorders along the spectrum, beyond just bulimia, anorexia. We talk about all of the different eating disorders, what that tends to mean for the person who's experiencing it, how to recognize it in your family and your partner, as well as what help is out there to support someone that you love, or even yourself if you're experiencing an eating disorder. I really love what she has to say and the information that she brings to the table on this episode. If you have experienced an eating disorder, we'd love to hear what's helped you get through, maybe some things that were helpful, some things that weren't so helpful. So go on to our Facebook page, facebook.com/Birds and Bees podcast, or you can call up and leave a message on our voicemail line. That's 385-449-1818. Leave us a voicemail. It would be more confidential. We wouldn't post your name or anything, but we'd love to hear what your experience was. If you know someone that might be struggling or that is needing some support with this, and you feel like this episode would be supportive to them, feel free to send them, to share this link with them, to share this episode. We really want to support those who are going through these difficult times and are looking for the extra support that they need. Without further ado, this is episode 17 with Jessie Shepard, a.k.a. Jessie the Therapist, on Birds and Bees podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we hope you enjoy the show. All right, welcome to Birds and Bees podcast. This is Braxton Dutson, and I'm here with Jessie the Therapist. I don't know if you want me to call you Shepard, but
Yeah, Jessie Shepard, yeah.
But all across social media, she's known as Jessie the Therapist. I mean, your website is jessiethetherapist.com,
Yes, yeah.
right?
Uh-huh.
And Blue Clover Therapy.
Yes, that's my practice.
Yeah, so that's your practice. Jessie the Therapist, you're on Fox 13 every once in a while. Who else do you go on to?
So Park City TV, here and there.
Park City TV.
We do some stuff with KSL and a few different things with Broadway media. Just whoever wants to let me come on, chat about stuff.
You've got really cool things for parents that I've been seeing. You know, like how much, one of the last ones I saw was, I think it was something about sugar. I can't remember.
Oh.
That was back in October, the one that I'm thinking of, the one that stuck.
Oh, the Death by Sugar.
Death by Sugar.
Yeah.
Yep. I was like,
you can't die from too much sugar. Come to find out. Yep.
Well, I figured once water can be the killer, where you have years ago when the moms one mom was punishing her child by making her drink water.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like if water can kill you, then everything.
Pretty much everything else can. Yeah.
Completely. So you're a blogger as well. Where do we find your blog at?
Just jessiethetherapist.com.
Oh, okay.
Yep, same thing. So that's kind of where everything goes. So I have a podcast, Get Yourself Together with Jackson Carter. All of those are posted there. Any articles that are published, any segments, all of that goes.
All of it goes right to Jessie the Therapist. Wonderful. So I'm curious, how did you become a therapist? Like, what brought you to all this?
So I actually didn't want to be a therapist. I wanted to be a nurse. Yeah. I worked on an ambulance downtown in Salt Lake City, and for a very long time, several years, and I really enjoyed the mental health calls. And we actually had a specific call where my shoulder dislocated, and I had to have several surgeries to get it to go back into like a normal function. And so I started school, and I had every intention of being a nurse. And then I started going to more psychology courses because they do require certain mental health type courses in nursing.
Which makes sense.
And which is good. I think it's great. But those are the ones that I really enjoyed. And so that was kind of the shift into mental health.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool. So how long have you been practicing for now?
Oh my gosh. Everybody asks me this and I really should just write it on my hand.
It's always hard.
Yeah. So let's see. This is my 4th year being licensed. I worked in residential beforehand. And then I also worked in in-home therapy and then some individual like behavioral type therapy.
Nice.
So
Nice.
Yeah.
So, and right now, is you work in Blue Clover Therapy.
Yep.
Which is the name of your company. Well, I was
Business
practice. There we go. Practice.
Yeah, we're up in Cottonwood Heights. Yep, and we just opened up and went for it, and it's apparently working out. So that's pretty good.
Is there a specific populations you work with? I mean, eating disorders. From what I've been seeing on your website, there's a few.
Yeah, so I specialize in trauma and eating disorders in all ages. So I don't necessarily specify age because it varies.
Okay.
But trauma, eating disorders. And then I also have fellow therapists that work with me that do behavioral stuff, motivational interviewing.
Oh, nice.
Those kind of things. Yeah.
Love that motivational interview.
Yes. It's a powerful tool.
It is. So eating disorders, that's kind of one of the main reasons I brought you on the show today.
Yes.
Is because I'm fascinated with the work that you do. And I thought it was really important for parents to know if your partner's going through this, if you yourself are experiencing some eating disorder, how to identify if this is something you're going through, if your child is, if your teen is, because it sounds like a lot more kids are being diagnosed with eating disorder of some degree, and it's happening younger and younger.
Oh, it is incredibly distressing.
Yeah.
So the statistics show that, let's see, it's 4% of 5-year-olds are already dieting of some kind.
4% of 5-year-olds are dieting?
Yeah, and a 5-year-old, their body has nowhere near developed, and kids are all about like the chunky stages and then the long stages, and that's just kind of how we grow. So the fact that 4% of 5-year-olds are already thinking about what they're eating, doing restrictive eating, and it's not necessarily a diet that has been implemented through the parental unit. So that's incredibly distressing because that's observing things and observing body types and showing that there's rumination on this.
Wow.
So that's incredibly distressing. And then we start to see as they get older, about 42% of, they did this study between 1st grade and 3rd grade, where they wanted these folks, and both males and females wanted to be thinner.
Oh.
So this is, so, I mean, we're talking.
So it's not just the 5-year-old girls or 5-year-old boys that are experiencing this, but both want
sexes.
to be thinner. Both sexes want.
And that's kind of where, because that was one of the questions that you were like, let's make sure to talk about how frequent these disorders are actually diagnosed.
Yeah.
And whereas, I mean, there's a lot of different statistics, and depending on how it's worded, it can be completely different. Like before, I mean, gosh, maybe even 5 years ago, we thought boys really couldn't have eating disorders. And that's completely inaccurate. But based on our language that we were using, they were like, no, I don't restrict my eating, or I don't want to be super thin, or what body part is fat, or we were using verbiage that you would see very commonly maybe with women or young girls, but not with boys and men.
Okay, and so they weren't identifying with the wording.
Right, and so very underreported. And eating disorders in general are underreported because it's a secretive disorder that you're dealing with. It's something that, I mean, we all need to eat. And so we already have that drive to, eat and change our body and see what's, like we observe ourselves. But then the majority of eating disorder behaviors are very, very secretive.
Wow.
And so a random study with a little, like, check which box works for you, very likely is not going to have people be completely honest about what's actually going on.
Especially because they don't want people to know.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. Right. So do we have an idea of where eating disorders come from? Is it like genetic? Is it biological? I guess that's the same question, but is it socially a change? Like where are we seeing this come in? Do you know?
All of it.
All of it.
All of it.
Biopsychosocial.
The whole bit, yeah. Which is like, I guess it's the simple answer to that. But it is kind of a nature-nurture kind of a situation. Socially, I mean, we can say, well, eating disorders are happening much younger, but you get into arguments with reporting and verbiage and, actual research studies and what brackets of age that we're testing.
Yeah.
Whereas, a few years ago, we weren't testing 5-year-olds to see how often they were dieting because we didn't think that was an issue. But now we're looking at all ages and seeing that there is a pattern that kind of sweeps up through the ages that necessarily won't be caught by these kind of general surveys or,
wow,
even just asking about how's your diet, So
yeah, that's intense.
Yeah.
I'm thinking 5-year-olds and restrictive eating. That's pretty crazy to me to think that's the concern is already starting that young.
Right. Well, and they show that 4 out of 5 elementary kids are think that someone who is fat or obese or appears that way has a lesser of a life.
Oh,
like that they're more depressed, that they're more anxious, that they're not as successful, and that I would argue would be kind of a media social upbringing.
Gotcha.
Where else would you get those kind of assumptions?
Yeah, for real.
Yeah.
That fat people, someone that's obese is obviously more sad or more anxious.
Or not as cleanly. Like all of these things are not accurate, but yet obviously they're getting these thoughts somewhere.
Totally.
So, I would make the argument of social, but again, it's correlation, not causation.
Correlation, not causation.
Yes.
That happens.
If there's anything I got out of my undergrad, boom, that's it.
Correlation. Not causation. When I was like I was telling you a little bit earlier before we were recording, being at the radio show over with K-Bear 101. Gosh, it's so funny how many people are like, what causes that? This happened to me. What happens? Like, tell me what's doing that. I was like, correlation, not causation. Don't get after me.
Like, stop.
It's so many things. We don't have time.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So in this situation, that's exactly what we're running into.
Right.
Social, bio, not quite sure. It could be so many different things, but media definitely plays a role in this.
Yes, I would say so.
One of the next questions I have for you was essentially, who experiences eating disorders? And we've been talking about this then, from 5 years old all the way through the lifespan, it sounds like.
Right. Well, and you'll get into, we talk about little kids and teenagers, obviously that seems to be our target. Mm-hmm. But as we age, that can be just as distressing because all of a sudden you're losing your youth. It might be harder to keep weight off. Those different things, or just body changes in general. We get wrinkly, and I'm getting gray hair, guys.
Oh man.
So I know, because I have so many kids. So that's what I blame. No, but like if that was distressing to me, I might try to remedy it with other things. Mm-hmm. And so pregnant women, like we tend to think of, they're carrying this child and it's this sacred thing. And maybe they're preparing for the child, but there's huge body changes that occur with pregnancy. And so if you already if you're already distressed about being thin and all of a sudden your belly's getting bigger, even though it has nothing to do with fat, it doesn't have anything to do with diet, you were literally growing a human, it can be incredibly distressing.
Completely. And in episode 9 of Birds and Bees podcast, I was talking with Paige Smathers about this, where it's like, she broke down everything where it's like, baby weighs this much, water weighs this much, the fat weighs this much to have the baby, and you've got this and this, and it comes up to like 30 pounds of just like minimum.
Yes.
Minimum.
Yeah.
And that's not if your body decides that it needs some more or whatever's going on. And so I encourage anyone to go listen to that when it comes to like eating specific for pregnancy.
Yes.
But,
it was a really good episode too, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I enjoyed the information that she had. That was really fascinating. I think bringing it up here is very important too, that all of a sudden you're growing a human and you don't have control over growing the human.
Nope.
Your body is doing what it's meant to do. Mm-hmm. And so it can feel like a sense of you've lost control over an aspect of your life.
Yes.
Do you find that happens to be a common occurrence with those that are experiencing an eating disorder?
The issue of control?
Yeah.
Yes. So there are very few things that people can actually control in life. Mm-hmm. So whether you're alive or you're dead, and even then, sometimes you can't, your bodily functions like using the restrooms, and then eating. So when folks are, like picky eaters, for instance. That can be a very distressing thing for parents, because like you have to eat something other than mac and cheese. Like there has to be something else out there that you will put in your mouth. But for whatever reason, if they're liking that, it can be extremely distressing for the parent and not for the child. So you have to understand and kind of try to see if there's a control issue going on. If their life is incredibly chaotic, that might be an attempt to control the situation. Same thing with if they're experiencing trauma, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse. If they can't control those things, they might try to control their body in that they can control their weight and how much they eat. And if they're hungry, if they're not hungry, if they can still fill their body at all, depending on disassociation and
totally,
So
the control can come in from any aspect of it. If you don't feel like you're in control of your life, that's one of the first things that goes to you. It's like, okay, I can control if I'm eating or not.
Right. And that can be one of them for sure. I mean, it all kind of, everything is trauma, it's everything is. So maybe you had a really hard childhood, or maybe you were teased a lot, or, there's all kinds of different aspects, but yeah, you can control your body. And that's when that kind of starts spinning out of control, because your idea of who you are and what you really look like can start morphing into something completely different.
Yeah. So you have a sexual assault that occurs, and all of a sudden I didn't have control over this. There was power taken from me, and the cycle starts.
Right.
Any part of trauma, which I guess it makes perfect sense that you've got Blue Clover therapy, which is trauma and eating disorders, and they just go hand in hand.
They couple really nicely, just in that we're dealing with different, and it might not be an eating disorder or eating behavior. We might be dealing with different control issues, or just ways that we're trying to make sense of the world.
Yeah.
And that's why I work with all ages, because it's different parts. Like a kid who's exhibiting eating disorder behaviors is going to look different or the same as an adult, as someone who's like a geriatric, or so it's really quite interesting.
So it changes throughout the lifespan. Yeah.
Well, and I don't want to make it where you lose hope, but once you have used that as a coping mechanism, if you don't set yourself up for success and make sure that you have other coping mechanisms, in a really dark time, you might go back to that coping mechanism.
Gotcha. So it's always in the back of your mind of being like, that works for me. And if there's not other things to be able to put in place, it's really hard to...
Right. And that's why you want to make sure that you're doing self-care and making sure that you're very much aware of when you feel like you might fall back into those behaviors. Yeah.
So every time, or as I talk about eating disorders, a lot of times people start coming up with, all right, I've got bulimia, and I want to say anxiety, but it's not anorexia.
Whatever. Anxiety. The other one.
But bulimia, anorexia, those are kind of the two popular ones, I guess you'd say, that at least I hear more mainstream of kids being like, I'm anorexic, I'm bulimic, I throw up.
Right.
But some other ones, I mean, do you see any others that come through? Like I've heard of orthorexia.
Yes.
Yeah.
So trying to control the
diet.
Yeah. So, and everything's a gray area, if we're being honest, with mental health in general. So, people sometimes will be like, well, I have bulimia, I've always had bulimia, and that's it. So when they start moving into a different bracket, let's say they're compulsively exercising, they say, well, it's not bulimia. But the thing is with eating disorders is that eating disorders kind of roam in that diagnostic block in the DSM.
Okay, yeah.
So you might not be throwing up, but you're restricting. Or you're binging, but you're not purging.
Gotcha.
Or you're purging, but you're not binging. And it can change throughout your life. You might think that you have eating under control. You're eating regular meals. You're not distressed when you're eating these meals. You're like, I got things that I can eat in public, whatever it is. But then you spend 6 hours exercising.
Yeah.
Like the eating disorder has not gone away. It's just changed what's going on.
It's morphed.
Right.
Holy cow.
Right. And so, and one that people don't really talk about is, okay, so it depends on you're on the East Coast or the West Coast. So there's pica and pica.
Oh,
okay.
It would change so much.
It really does. Because I've gotten angry emails on both sides of those.
Like, how dare you use the I in that form?
It's like, I don't know which one is.
It's almost like the argument in Utah with crick and creek.
Yes.
One makes sense. The other one is country.
Yeah, it's very country. Well, so where you're eating objects that aren't necessarily edible. So you're eating foam, or you're eating chalk, or you're eating dirt, or these various things. Like, you could go from where you're exhibiting binge and purge behaviors, and then suddenly now, well, you just eat dirt.
Yeah.
You know, and kind of going through like these different things. And so
is the treatment plan, or working with someone who has pica?
you know, wherever you're from.
But who has pica, or is experiencing those symptoms? What do you work with? How do you start working with someone that is experiencing that? Is it the same as if binging and purging, or any of these? Because
obviously they're getting something out of the behavior. Everything that we do, we're doing it for a reason.
Yeah.
And so the scary thing about eating things that you shouldn't be eating is that it can be some serious medical issues, because everything can get backed up, or specifically like couch cushions and couch fluff.
Yeah.
I mean, that's full surgery. They like have to go in and take it out, like, because it doesn't digest, and it can bundle in areas, and it's just bad news. So you want to make sure with any eating disorder that you're dealing with the medical pieces first.
Okay.
Whatever's going on there. So make sure that they're getting enough nutrition, vitamins are okay. Because people, like pregnant women, may eat dirt because they crave the dirt.
Yeah.
Because there's something in it that they want. And so making sure that everything's balanced and good. Any client that I work with that has eating disorder behaviors has to be seeing either a doctor or a nutritionist.
Oh, okay.
Because we're dealing with a bigger animal than just the eating disorder. Now, sometimes people see me initially before they go, disclose all of it, because they've been hiding it for so long. And then we, figure out how to disclose that. But so you start there medically.
Okay.
And then you figure out what they're getting from the behavior and what emotions come out. So do they feel guilt and shame after the behavior, or have they kind of somehow rationalized in their brain that it's okay, or what thought processes are going on? Because you have to figure out what's going on, and you have to figure out how to replace that with something that is healthier and makes more sense for their mental well-being.
So if it's control that they're getting out of it, how can we have something that we have control over? If it's reduction in anxiety, is there another place that we can get reduction in anxiety through different? If it's wanting to feel like, oh, my stomach feels pain, and now I'm kind of back in my body,
right?
How can we do that in other methods that aren't going to be as harmful right now as we work through?
Right. And it could be the feeling of pain, or it could be the wanting to disassociate. Oh. So sometimes folks will...
Can you explain a little bit more of that?
So disassociation is essentially... Now, it's an actual disorder. But if we're talking about as like a mental behavior or something that's going on, it's essentially where you detach from your body. So you actually are unable to kind of feel that you exist, like your body. Sometimes people can get to the point where they almost feel like they're an avatar. Really? So you kind of get tunnel vision a little bit. You just don't feel present. Oftentimes your reactions are really slow because it takes a second for it to process back.
Wow.
It really does feel like you're gone.
Like you're out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when you do that, you don't feel if you're hungry or if you're full or if you are hurt, or it can be common in like sexual abuse where you leave your body, and they'll actually watch. Like I've had clients where they will be watching the sexual abuse from up above, and they can see it they can see what's going on, but they're completely emotionally detached from what's going on in the body. So we want to know if that's happening, because that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Because we need to be able to feel the body, and we have to be comfortable being in the body. So let's say that you're emotionally distressed. Something happened at work. You're really upset. So you go and you get a dozen donuts and you sit down. And as you're starting to eat all of this food, you disassociate, because it makes you think that you're calmer because you're not there, but it doesn't mean that you're calmer.
But because you're dissociating, you're kind of
you're just kind of, you just don't feel it.
Is that kind of the same thing when I get home? I'm distressed. All of a sudden, half the ice cream's gone. And I'm like, oh, crap.
Same thing. Yeah. So there's night eating, and there's kind of, it's where you're trying to comfort. There's this comfort eating. Really, though. Yeah. And as humans, we do that anyway, because when we're distressed, biologically, we want to make sure we're having enough food and we're safe and we're in our little shelter and all of those things that keep us alive.
Oh.
And so that's where we start getting kind of compulsive in our eating, where it's like, okay, well, if I'm full, I know I'm okay. Mm-hmm. And so that's where you get into like kiddos that maybe didn't have enough food growing up, or I didn't have enough food, or it was the
so they're constantly worried about what's in the pantry or when the next meal's going to be,
right? So
and then hoarding food, or like anytime you can get it, putting it and hiding it or something like that.
Yeah, either hiding the food or eating as much of it as you possibly can, so that you feel safe, you feel okay.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, I mean, it's interesting because you're dealing with, and you deal a lot with kind of sexual disorders and various things. Like these are things that, like biologically, like we want to have sex and we want to eat food.
Yes.
Like these are the things. And so our body's telling us to do these various things, but then they kind of get warped and changed and
and there's different meanings put to it, and all of a sudden,
yes, where it takes away from the original healthy piece of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Another piece I want to really encapsulate in this is we talk a lot about food, and I think that this over exercising is something to really get played into, or at least for us to address even more. Is that I found it interesting is the more people will go to the gym maybe 3 times a day, or will work out for 6 hours, and there's a praise behind it.
Yeah, like, oh, you're getting to the gym, good job.
Like,
you're
oh my
getting
gosh,
thinner. Yeah.
I wish that I could go to the gym for that long. You were so dedicated.
Yeah.
Oh my heavens, you've been going for, you went 3 times a day. I could never do that. And you were just, you look so thin and you're so amazing. And they get all this praise from it too.
Right.
And so that's something to be recognizing as well, that over exercising is not a healthy behavior.
No.
And it's right along those lines of, or it is a part of an eating disorder, controlling. Almost from what I've understood, a lot of people have thoughts of like, okay, I ate that. Now I need to work 30 minutes.
Compensation behavior.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There's compensation of
compensation behavior.
Yeah.
Okay.
So whether it's throwing it up or it's making sure you run 5 extra miles or.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
It's, and so, excuse me. So it doesn't have to be necessarily a calorie count that they're doing this exercise. They might just be doing this exercise.
Oh, okay. But
some folks do. There's calorie counting and there's carbs and like, okay, how much is in this? That means that this equates to this many sit-ups or this many miles or, and that's dangerous in its own right because that's not actually how it works.
Yeah.
Like you can't run off your calories because that would be a, magic wand moment for me. I could totally make millions of dollars off that.
Wouldn't that be nice?
But it doesn't equate because you still put that in your body. Mm-hmm. So
almost like the sleeping thing where it's like, oh, I stayed up for 24 hours. I'm probably gonna need to sleep for 12 to make up.
Right. It doesn't work like that. It absolutely doesn't work like that. Mm-hmm. So I mean, it's important to note, and it's also important to note the lifestyle. Mm-hmm. Like I've worked with professional athletes. They really do need to work out 3 times a day it's literally all they do, right? Uh-huh. They have these coaches that are very specific about what they're doing. However, the difference is they also have to eat like 10,000 calories or something just to keep up with whatever they're doing. Mm-hmm. And everything is well regimented in that way where they can still keep their muscle mass or whatever they're working on specific, with still doing these exercises.
I was watching something on The World's Strongest Man and they were following him and he's like, I've got to shop about once every other day. Mm-hmm. And he's spending $300 a trip to the store because he's like, this is breakfast, a dozen eggs. Like this is for lunch. And I've got more eggs for a snack. And then I've got 14 pounds of meat that I'm going to devour in the next 3 or 4 days. Mm-hmm. And it is like, holy cow. But then he's working out and he's got biceps the size of my torso. And the dude's huge.
Well, we got to wonder what's going on, but sure, that might be, there are people who do things as professions that need to maintain that. Uh-huh. And so, I think as long as the mindset is healthy, then it's an okay deal. But when you start getting into like, just compensating for different things or feeling guilt and shame are huge.
Oh yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Holy cow.
So if there's any type of eating that you're doing or exercising or vomit, whatever it is. If there's shame and guilt associated, you got to wonder what's going on, and we got to turn that bus
is
around.
it because that's the turning the bus around? Is that because we're starting down a path that is just like guilt to shame to action to guilt to shame to action?
Yeah. It all feeds itself. So you keep going and you keep going and like, oh well, I ate that extra donut. Now I have to do this. And, but I was at the gym instead of with my kids. Oh, my kids don't love me. And it turns to this whole thing. Oh, nobody loves me. It's because I'm too big. And then we just move down this line of thinking, and it just cycles on itself.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like you said, feeds on itself. Kind of an ironic sense, but it's intense.
Right.
So with that, with the with everything that we start to experience, how do we know that we've gotten to a point of an eating disorder? I guess because years ago I remember doing a Biggest Loser challenge with Odyssey House when I was working over there, and I was like, okay, I'll get in on this. And I found myself kind of playing with that bus, that cycle where I was like, okay, I've got to win. Super competitive side of me comes out. I was like, I've got to win this. There's $100 on the line in 4 months or something like that. Right. But so I go in there and I start working out, and all of a sudden towards the end, I recognize that I'm blowing the competition out of the water. I'd lost like 20% of me or something like that.
Wow, yeah.
I did really good in that sense. But then I was also noticing that I'd have these thoughts. All of a sudden I would eat some ice cream, or I would have a candy bar or something like that once in every 2 weeks or something like that. And my immediate thoughts would start to turn to like, oh my gosh, now we've got to go work. We've got to go work out. Right. Or we got to do something else. Or I can't believe that you just ate that. Like now we're throwing all this down the tube. Like you think you're going to lose this competition? Right. And I would start getting into that. So at what state would you start saying that maybe I would need to go see you, a Blue Clover Therapy?
Well, at any point, if it's distressing, you should at least sit down and think about what's going on.
And that's where I hit that, where I was like, okay, hold the phone. Yeah. I don't need to, I think the main turning point was I was like, oh, I should throw that up. And I was like, that's interesting. Yeah. That's an interesting thought to have. I've never had that before because it was rare. I mean, I've never had that.
Right. Right. Well, what's cool is that you were healthy-minded enough to be like, oh, okay, hold on. That's not okay. Like, we don't do that. So I would hope that people are observant enough to be able to go like, this is impacting my life in a negative way. Whether it's solely mentally, like people don't know the inner battle that's going on in my head, or I am specifically skipping meals, or I'm hiding when I eat so that people don't really know when I'm eating, or, whatever these are. If there's any type of secretive pieces or just maladaptive type thinking, it's time to reach out and figure out what to do. Now, with yours, it sounds like before you had relatively okay eating. Yeah. And so you were able to kind of go back to that, or I'm assuming, and be like, oh, okay. So
yeah, I was like, all right, it is okay to have ice cream. Yeah. It is. Yeah, okay right.
This is a normal thing. But as it starts to impact life, and I think with anything, any type of mental disorder or physical disorder, the second it starts impacting you in a negative way, it's time to seek help and figure out what's going on.
Gotcha. So being able to recognize that.
And a lot of people do not meet DSM eating disorder criteria, specifically because there's so much drifting that happens between eating disorders. But it might not be the severity in which they have decided that's the duration that they have to be doing, they have to be doing it in order to get the diagnosis. That's where you want someone who has worked with eating disorders and knows that it is actually a very severe thing. And whatever you're telling them is probably only half the truth, because it's usually how it works. And then like figuring out what to do. What would be the best course of action, and what we're trying to remedy with these behaviors. So you wanted to win the competition.
Yes.
And so figuring out like, well, how do we win the competition as healthy, individuals, and, making sure that we're exercising like a normal person.
Yeah.
Or,
Totally. So. Not avoiding the extremes.
Right.
How can we go about this? How important it is to you to have this healthy piece versus an extreme.
Well, and that's the thing is the body types that we see on magazines, specifically women, but also with men, because the men just have that like superhero V thing going, right? Only, I think it's something like 4.8% of the population can get that body type.
Thor.
But, I know. Come on, Thor. No, but really, so that means that the rest of the entire population is trying to look like something that literally they can't achieve.
95.2% of people are trying to get there.
Right. And that's just it. Is like every body type is completely different. So we can't be comparing in that way. And that's where like BMI comes into play. And like I think it's a fair thing, you know, it was developed by insurance companies.
Yeah.
But to try to figure out your healthiness. But I think also if you're eating healthy and you're exercising on a regular basis and you're keeping your mental health put together with good self-care, you know, that's when you're going to find your healthy body.
Yeah.
Not what the, you know, scale says.
Gotcha.
So
definitely that makes a lot of sense. So if parents are wanting to, you know, say it's as we're talking to couples or we're talking to parents and they're noticing some slight changes because like you said, it's a very secretive thing.
Yeah.
What might be some signs that your teenager or your child is starting to develop some of these habits? So
if they're eating things that are not edible, obviously that's like, what's going on there?
Don't eat the couch.
Yeah, it's like, come on. If you now kids are interesting because their weight varies anyway. So over that, you're going to want to watch over a span. And the nice thing is you have to take your kids in, or you don't have to, I guess not. But most people take their kids into the doctor and they get weighed and all of that. So you can kind of see weight changes that way. If they are odd with their eating behaviors at the dinner table, because there can be a control thing where like, you're like, you need to eat something other than mac and cheese. And they say no. And then you're in this little argument going back and forth. Right. So, you can rotate meal plans according to everybody in the household gets to pick a meal.
Oh,
and that way, and you can make it as a family. It's a whole like rapport building thing. And that way they feel like they have control over Wednesday night's meal.
Wonderful.
So they can determine that mac and cheese every single Wednesday is going to be had and everybody's going to eat it and everybody has to deal, right? And so there's a sense of control in that. There's a sense of pride because try to get them to make it. But if you're seeing picky eaters, not all picky eaters have eating disorders and not everybody with eating disorders are picky. Yeah. So it's if something feels wrong, and I know that that's like the most vague answer ever, but if you're like, wonder what's going on, try to ask questions and see what's going on and how they feel about their bodies and do they feel fat? Did someone call them fat? Are they being teased? Another interesting question to ask folks if you're worried that they're having a body kind of image issues is asking them what their favorite part of their body is. Because it more than likely is their eyes and their wrists. Your eyes and your wrists don't get fat. Okay. So more than likely, those are going to be the items that they're okay with. And what's the body part that you hate the most? Oh, thighs, tummy, boobs, whatever. Then everything else just blah, 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 comes out. Gotcha. And that's where we have to do something where they can learn to like their bodies and be okay with their bodies. And, maybe get healthier as a family so that mentally everybody's on point. It's not just singled out. Yeah. It's not like, hey, you're being weird. Stop being weird. It's, hey, as a family, why don't we eat more vegetables? Or as a family, why don't we all eat together? Eat at the dinner table without versus eating shows in room. Or, that kind of thing. Because you tend to eat more mindlessly if there's a show on. Not so much with music or even podcasts. Hey. Because it's funny with podcasts because people feel like other people are in the room. So it's actually an interesting social interaction. Yeah, your post about having it in the room, it also like helps you feel like you're not alone. Right. It's kind of interesting. So it doesn't have the same reaction as if you're watching a show or a movie or something as you're eating. Oh, okay. So if you are going to eat at night, let's say, because I'm a night eater, I love it, like cookies and all the delicious things. And it's like right before I go to bed, which is like the worst time for you to eat ever. I just make sure, and this is a good practice, not to be watching a show or a movie while you eat. So you have to be mindful of what you're eating. and pay attention to what your tummy is telling you.
Gotcha.
So,
which apparently it takes somewhere around 20 minutes to, like, if you're eating.
Yes.
Like, you have to give yourself 20 minutes for your stomach to go, oh yeah, we're full.
We're good.
Versus
no
the
more.
20 minutes has passed and you're still eating. You're like, this one's going to hurt.
This was too much. I went too far with this.
I immediately regret my decisions.
Well, I mean, and that's a good thing to note, because in that 20 minutes of like let's say watching a movie, you might have shoveled another serving completely into your mouth. Like, it would have been a whole nother plate of food.
Yep.
Whereas if you are mindfully eating and paying attention to taste and kind of becoming the little foodie, you eat so much less and you pay much more attention to what your body's feeling.
Gotcha. So being able to recognize, okay, let's have dinner together, or, we're going to eat more vegetables. We're going to make this a family ordeal. And it's kind of a way to help so that we're not scuttling off, so no one knows how much we're eating.
Right.
Things along those lines.
Yeah.
That can help.
Even go for a walk after, because it's a good distraction. Folks, if they're...
So like a family could go for a family walk.
Or a couple, or go for whatever.
Yeah.
Because sometimes the feeling of being full can be really distressing. And so if you're going on a walk, then you have bilateral stimulation with the walking process. And so you're less likely to notice kind of that pain response, specifically if we're dealing with expanding the stomach after an eating disorder. Being able to go for a walk after kind of eases that.
Yeah. Which the bilateral stimulation is kind of what you do with EMDR, right?
Yes. Yeah.
All right. I want to hear more about this EMDR.
EMDR is awesome.
Eye movement desensitization. I screwed it up.
Eye movement desensitization reprocessing.
Oh, right. I wasn't too far off.
No, you weren't too far off at all. So EMDR is actually really well researched. For a bit, it was the experimental woo-woo version of therapy. Like, what is that doing? So it can be done in several different ways. It can be done where you're kind of tapping on someone's knees back and forth, or on their feet. I've done that before, like just tapping their feet. I have actual tappers where it just buzzes back and forth between each hand. You can do it where someone follows your fingers, or like I have a little magic wand for the little ones where they follow the little sparkly star.
Nice.
Going back and forth. And walking and hiking and all of those things also does the same thing. So what it does is it replicates bilateral stimulation, very similar to REM sleep. So in REM sleep, you are processing things. Your body this is a very simplistic way to explain this. But during REM sleep, your body is kind of going through the filing cabinet, if you will, and determining if something needs to go to short-term memory, long-term memory, or discard it altogether. I mean, that's why we don't know what we ate last Wednesday for dinner. Like, I have no idea because I don't need that information. Yeah. So, and that's why REM sleep is so important, because we do a lot of wonderful, beautiful things during REM sleep that we really need. So it replicates that, where you can go to the event or the stimulus, whatever it is, and you can kind of go through like a replaying and a processing while they are comfortable in the present moment.
Oh, okay.
So the big piece is that they can go from being kind of upset, just hyper aroused, just here, like we're just in our head, to being able to calm down in a relatively quickly manner.
Wow.
So people's threshold for that can be very, very, very thin. And so the first thing we do is we expand on that, and that's essentially just coping skills. I use a lot of dialectic behavioral therapy.
Nice.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I love it.
Because there's so many excellent coping skills there, and ways to, develop self-worth, self-esteem, and kind of make that gap bigger. And then you can start processing the big events. So, so I specialize in significant trauma. I think all trauma is significant, if we're being honest, but there are big T's and little T's. And so that's kind of what we're looking for, is that being able to be in that moment, process through that moment, and then be able to come back to where you're safe, calm, able to function, drive a car. Versus
staying in.
Yep, in that
traumatic repeat.
Right, and because the brain wants to complete its circuit.
Yes.
Like if I say ready, set, everybody's brains are screaming, go, right?
Yep.
Because that's the next step. That's what gets us running, right? But the problem with trauma and control and abuse and all these different things is that we go through ready, set, and we never hit the go. Like it never gets fully processed through. And so the brain just sits there and skips on it. And we start getting significant rumination, which then obviously messes up sleep, which messes up everything else in the world.
Which is where these nightmares start to come from too, right?
Yes.
You're trying to process.
Trying to get things going through, you know? And so, I mean, you'll have night terrors and flashbacks and all kinds of horrific things. And so that's kind of the idea.
Yeah.
Is being able to use bilateral stimulation to keep people in a calm state that they can also process the significant event and be able to. It's not erasing your memory, and it's not hypnotherapy or anything. You will always
status.
That'd be awesome. Kidding me? That'd be amazing. But it eliminates or reduces, at the very least, some of that emotional connection so that you can function.
Nice.
Because some things are going to be traumatic no matter what. If you were raped, it's going to be traumatic either way.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want to make you indifferent to that because it's an event, right? So being able to at least make it so you can function so you're not completely debilitated when that memory comes up.
Yeah.
That's the idea.
That you can bring yourself back.
Yep.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So you use that when we start talking about or when you have someone come in, that's a part of the therapeutic process.
Yes.
Or can be.
It can be. And everybody kind of goes through there's different stages in EMDR. Like you want to make sure they have excellent coping skills and that you can process a smaller event and have it where they can go home and function. Yeah. Drive a car. All those really important things to function as an adult or not get in fights at school if they're a kiddo or, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's been shown to be extremely effective, specifically with PTSD, but like we said, trauma's in everything. Uh-huh. And so, I also use it with my eating disorder, diagnoses. Yeah. And it works well.
Great.
Yeah.
I know that neither you or I are medical providers, but let's talk a little bit about what some of the physical, emotional, mental effects are of someone who experiences an eating disorder. The one that starts coming to the top of my head is when you're not eating and you go not eating for days, your body's like, okay, we're dying.
Yep.
And so
your body literally thinks it's dying.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
And one of the things that I know of most is like irregular periods or you just don't have a period.
Right.
And I believe that also goes with men as well, where we might, and I don't have any research on it. However,
no, it does affect, like you'll get erectile dysfunction.
Erectile, yeah.
And then arousal in general will be depleted in both males, females. It really messes up all because if you don't have enough to eat, you're less like psychologically, physically, the whole bit, your body isn't going to want to reproduce. No. So it wants to get food first and know it's okay before it starts reproducing. So so all of those things that make us adults as sexual beings is going to be significantly
kind of like what hypothermia or frostbite. The reason all that stuff happens is your body says, we are way too cold and we're going to pull all the blood from the extremities because those ultimately don't keep us alive. What our body does, our internal organs and our brain. Those are the things that keep it there. So it's the same thing when we're not eating. Essentially, like we don't need to reproduce. That is not on the top of the list right here. We need to survive. Right. And so we're going to pack on the fat. We're going to hold everything and we're going to just shut everything down that's not necessary.
Right. Well, and that's the thing is folks who have eating disorders actually don't die from starvation. I think that's the biggest misconception. You're not wilting away in that way. It's usually heart failure or liver failure. Your organs just start shutting down because they can't handle it. It can't keep up the effort, Yeah. And so obviously you start getting significant dehydration is very common. Just being imbalanced as far as like electrolytes and hormone composition, like your body's all out of whack, so it's going to try to compensate in different ways. I mean, all kinds of, when it starts getting really late, you'll have like pooling of blood in different areas, like
oh really,
bloodshot eyes and kind of it's not blood tears, but it's just the blood starts reacting in odd ways.
It's not like petechiae where you get like the dots or anything. That's more with strangulation.
So
I guess.
if there's forcing of vomiting, you can get lots of kind of bruising in the face. I mean, it kind of depends, but I mean, when you start getting late stages, like those are late stages. Those are hospitalization, feeding tube, the whole gamut that way. Because I mean, it literally, your body just wilts away. There's just nothing, and not all people who have eating disorders are also really thin.
Yeah.
And because we think, oh well, anorexic, like skin and bone skeleton kind of folks, but that is not always the case. You can very well have an eating disorder and be obese. And it can still put your body out of whack, and it can still make it where your organs want to shut down and heart failure. And
so there's not a poster child or a poster adult for what this looks like.
No. And whereas I think that there's also been lots of really good strides in the areas of like awareness and all of that, I think there's also some misconceptions of what it actually is.
Yeah, completely. And I should also, saying that we're not medical providers, you were a medical provider to a certain extent.
To a certain extent, not a doc.
So I don't know. I was like, are you still there? I don't.
Well, so emergency medicine. So if you cut yourself, I'm on it. You lose a limb, gotcha. But like late stages of eating disorder, let's go to the hospital.
Go to the hospital. Not my thing.
Yeah.
The other thing that I'm thinking of when it comes to mental stuff, like being never enough, looking in the mirror and being like, there is that piece. Other than the wrist and the eyes, there's always something that could be changing.
Right.
Feeling like you're never enough, self-esteem, self-efficacy. I can't even do this. I can't get things done.
Well, and your brain is foggy because it's not getting any nutrients. And so it really doesn't make sense. Like your logic might not line up. You're shutting down, and that includes your brain, because your brain's actually super important.
Yeah.
Come to find out, who knew?
Yep.
But it needs that substance in order to continue to function on a level that it makes sense. And so you'll start feeling foggy. You'll get really tired, angry, emotions all over the place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So with the fogginess, we're going to feel fatigue. And at the same time, what I wonder about the connection with loved ones. Like, do you find people are starting to withdraw more? Are they isolating? Or is that just kind of depending on who the person is and what their skills
well, it's a
are?
secretive behavior normally. What's really distressing is there's like pro eating disorder websites.
Yes, I've read those. Holy cow.
It is really distressing. And there's also people who have groups where they give tips to each other to be thinner, or
like how to hide,
whatever.
Like how to make it look like you're eating, but you're really not, and keep going. You can make it another day. Right. It's almost the kind of along the same lines of what I've seen with those suicide texts, where it's like, don't be a baby, like just do it. Right. And it's like, are you kidding me? Oh, seriously. Well, and yeah, it's so sad. Yeah. Because that means there's a group of folks who feel like this is an okay thing and are kind of enabling each other and figuring stuff out. So whereas they might get closer socially to those groups, oftentimes the folks that are worried about them or are starting to see the behavior, they'll start to withdraw from them. Yeah. So. Gotcha. So if you're finding out my secret, I might get rid of you. Right. Or just hide more. Or hide more. Yeah. A game of cat and mouse type thing. Yeah. Or pretend more, get better at hiding things. And that's why it's almost like some folk, how some folks come in and they're like, I want help, let's do this. And they're just like, we'll just do it. And then, but oftentimes with these kind of things, specifically if someone has made them come in versus they came in on their own, it has to be soft and understanding, and let's figure this out together, and you're not alone anymore, because it makes it where it is you and me doing this, not just you and I'm telling you how to fix this. Yeah. So if a parent finds out that their child is participating in some of this, or starting, or has been for years, what might be a really good way for them to approach the child to make it so that, I don't know, that they might be a little bit more open to seeing a therapist? Come in. So don't control them. Don't control them. Don't do that. I'm going to make you go, or I'm going to tie you up and just make you go. Don't do any of that threatening stuff,
or I'm going to take away all your stuff, so you have to go, or
coming back to control.
I know the control. It's going to make things worse. Whereas I know that your intentions are good to try to get them to come in. It's important that we don't do these controlling behaviors. And then making sure that you have rapport with your kiddo or your spouse or whoever your friend, where you can have a very calm, don't take it personally conversation about what to do and how we're going to move together. And again, it's you two together, not me telling you need to do something.
Okay. Collaborative.
So, yes. It has to be you two doing something together. The second that you're telling someone to do something, like I'm the most, like me personally as a stubborn person, if someone says you're going to do this, I'm like, watch me. Even if it's something that I want to do, like I just have to, be a turd. So, so just making sure that you have that rapport, and you can even make it where you go and do things that they like to do. You go, I don't know, to the movies or
rock climbing
something
like
or
that.
hiking or something. And then when they're in the car because they can't do anything, be like, hey, so I've noticed this, or, but trying to approach it in a friendly, I want to help, let's do this together, you're not alone way.
Because this can also feel, I imagine for parents, it can feel like, okay, now I'm out of control. I'm supposed to be the parent in control, have all this stuff together, and we're dealing with control all around.
Right.
So not approaching it from I'm going to make you do something.
Right.
Are there other things that parents do that what's coming up for me, I guess, is maybe they personalize it. Like, I'm failing as a parent, and this is one way that I'm showing that I'm failing, and if you don't succeed, then I'm going to be the worst parent.
Right. And don't take it personally. It's that nature nurture situation. We're not worried about the cause at this point. We just want them to be better and be healthy.
Yeah.
So, calm down. and the illusion, which I am also a parent, and I also have this illusion every once in a while myself, where, there's this illusion that parents control their children. And that is completely inaccurate. Kids do whatever they want, and it's based on rapport and natural consequences that behaviors are changed.
So natural consequences and the relationship is all what this is based off of.
Right. And so if you can cultivate those two things, where there's that natural consequence of, like if you wreck the car, you can't drive the car anymore. I mean, that's a pretty natural thing, right?
Yes.
Like if I wreck my car, I don't have a car anymore, so I'm done. And then building rapport of because it makes all the difference who is asking you to do what.
Yeah.
If you really like that person, like, yeah, of course I'll do that. If the person was a jerk to you a second ago, like, I'm not doing that. That's ridiculous. So really those two things are the things that you can form a relationship with your child and have them start following rules and understand how to be an adult. But this illusion that we have control over our children is just insanity.
Or the same thing about being in a partnership.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same echo thing that you just said. Turn it into your partner or even yourself if you find yourself in that way. Like the control or this illusion that you are in charge of someone else's body as much as you want to be is not the case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
the other thing that I wonder about is the avoidance. If parents just avoid this issue, what are some consequences? Will it go away? Is it kind of one of those luck of the throwdown, throwing craps, I guess? Maybe you'll row sevens and your child will be just fine. And
so I don't know the stats on, and I don't know that there would necessarily be research of it going away.
I imagine not.
Yeah. I mean, just a hunch. It will probably just change into something else.
Gotcha.
It'll mutate into something else. So maybe they continue the eating binge and purge or whatever is going on, but maybe when they hit puberty, instead they're over exercising. Or other things. I mean, it can turn into cutting or any type of self-mutilation type pieces.
Sex as well.
Sex, drugs, any type of compensation type behaviors where we're, we want to numb ourselves in some way. And so, I mean, you should never ignore something. I think that avoidance is just, it's just silliness. Like that's
Yeah, I'm completely with you. The ignoring, I mean, just like your car. I always go back to the car thing. If there's a noise, it's not like, okay, please go away, please go away, please go away.
Yeah, it's
it
not.
continues to get worse and worse, or something else is going to happen. And eventually you're going to be on the side of the road going, oh, I can't do with this today.
Right. And
Because you're not ready.
The rattle could turn into a full-on like breakdown, and it could just be that it rattles, but you should know that what's happening.
What's going on?
And be like, oh yeah, so it's like if you get shot in the leg, you're not going to ignore that.
No.
You're gonna be like, you might maybe you'll wrap it up, maybe you'll just kind of like continue on your way, but at some point you're gonna have to deal with that, and it might heal and it might be fine for the most part. You might have a limp or something, but like you should at least know what is going on and at least be there in such a way that they can come to you if something's changed, or they do want help, or
that makes sense.
And
if I think the avoidance thing really comes back down to what we've talked about in many other episodes, where it is like, if you're uncomfortable, go practice in the mirror. Go about talking about this. A lot of it is, if you're uncomfortable, check in with that uncomfortability. Go see a therapist. Go see somebody and be like, I'm super uncomfortable. I need to discuss this, because it's something that you just don't go unattended.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and if you're uncomfortable, you're probably in a good spot.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you should just learn how to just even verbalize it. Be like, whoa, this is really uncomfortable for me. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what to say. I feel completely lost.
Yeah.
Let's figure out what to do. Because I am terrified.
Yeah. Own
There's nothing wrong with just being honest about not knowing what to do, So.
Yeah. Well, if you, as we're at the end of the episode, if you could leave the listeners, everyone, with one thing that you wanted to take away from this episode, or the eating disorders, what might be something that you leave with them?
Things can always be better. There's always hope. It doesn't matter what has gone wrong. It doesn't matter what you've done or what has happened. Things can always be better. And so kind of get out of your own way in that way and just be like, this is the way it is and this is where I'd like it to be. And figure out and get help and get support to be able to get where you want to be.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jessie, for coming
you.
on the show. We'll be doing another episode with Jessie coming up in the next couple weeks. And on that one, we're going to be talking about snowplow parenting, which is going to be awesome.
Pretty rad.
So we got helicopter parenting, tiger moms. I'm going to make up my own, and you'll hear it on the show there. But some of the stuff that I got from today's episode, one specifically from Jessie, as well as the nationaleatingdisorders.org. There's a screening tool there and stats. Like, you can look over just what stats there are, but the screening tool,
and they're very up to date, so that's nice.
They are. Yeah, so they're great to go to. nationaleatingdisorders.org. I'll have that posted with the blog or with the notes, and you can go take the screening tool there if you're curious, or have your partner take that, or your child. You can find Jessie at jessiethetherapist.com, blueclovertherapy.com, and Get Yourself Together podcast.
Yeah.
Over and check that out. It's a really fun podcast.
Well, you're gonna have to come on it and hang out with us.
Definitely would be really excited to. They make heavy topics more light, and Jessie's always there with great stats and information.
Oh, thank you. I'm a huge geek.
All right. Well, thank you again. Excited for the next one.
Thank you.
This has been another episode of the Birds and Bees podcast. Thank you for tuning in. If you have any questions about the show, comments, or questions you would like addressed in another episode, please give us a call at 385-449-1818. Leave your voicemail and your question, or you can also email us at birdsandbeespodcast@gmail.com, or visit us online at birdsandbeespodcast.com.